it is said that the Jewish people are to be an or lagoyim, a light to the nations. I think that there are few organizations out of Israel that capture that more powerfully than the organization that we are going to hear about in a few moments, IsraAID. It is on the ground when disaster strikes. Their workers are on the ground throughout the world. Whether it's caused by human beings to each other or by nature, IsraAID mobilizes and is out there doing the work of saving lives. Not only is it the right thing to do, the Jewish thing to do, not only is it an expression of the loftiest of Jewish values, but it also flies in the face of those who would malign the Jewish state. So we are honored to welcome someone who is a true hero, and I don't exaggerate in the least when I say that, in the world, because of what he has done. Yotam Polizer is the global CEO of IsraAID. During the last 15 years, he has built and led programs after natural disasters in Japan, Philippines, Nepal, Sierra Leone, Haiti, I think we can add to the list. It wasn't on the website, but I remember you were there. And also in South Korea to support the reintegration of North Koreans who defected. He has experience in education, humanitarian aid, international development. He's given TED Talks. You can find them online. IsraAID is currently supporting 16 communities across Israel, including people from Kibbutz Be'eri, Ner Oz, the Nova survivors, and the Bedouin villages, all affected by the Hamas attack, with health, support, education, and relief. We're going to hear about a new effort, one which is still being unveiled, and honestly, Yotam told me he can't tell us everything about it, about how IsraAID is being asked to coordinate aid in Gaza on behalf of the IDF and the Israeli government. He is here with Sherry Weinman. She's the co-founder of IsraAID. We're honored to have her, and its immediate past board chair. And Sean Kozalczyk, did I pronounce that right? Close enough, right? Close, okay, good. Who's the California director of IsraAID and in charge of global humanitarian assistance. So it is my privilege to welcome Yotam to the Bima, and your privilege, I would say, to be able to hear from him this evening.
Thank you. Next time, tell me to call my mom with this introduction. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's so great to be here, and I say it in many occasions, but this time it's actually true. This is first and foremost for me a support group, and I think we're all very much in need of support group these days. Exactly a week ago on Shabbat, I was at my parents' for Shabbat, right next to the Lebanon border. And Shabbat last week was just a few hours after the ceasefire. So I went to the border just a few miles from my parents' home, and it was beyond heartbreaking. I'm sure many of you have visited the beautiful Galilee. You can think about the wineries there and the orchards, and most of it is burned. And the stuff that is not burned, you see the fruits on the ground rotten because nobody was there to pick them up. So being able to be here in this beautiful community, listening to these beautiful prayers is first and foremost self-care for me. So thank you. My journey and doing disaster relief did not start in Israel. It started as far as it can be from Israel in Japan after the tsunami in 2011. When I joined IsraAID, at that time I joined as employee number 2. Now we have 450 full-time staff, so we went a long way. And I jumped on a plane to Fukushima where 20,000 people lost their lives. And I remember I've seen these images of this 120-foot wave of tsunami washing away everything. I'm sure many of you remember these images. And I had this terrible feeling of helplessness. I felt something is so much bigger than me, and I had to do something, even if it's small. So I jumped on a plane. It was an empty plane because everyone was basically running away. And then I fulfilled my first dream, which was to have my own private jet. I didn't have the money, so I decided to go to all these places that people are running away from. So I went to Fukushima in Japan, and I arrived in a kindergarten where 8 children lost their lives, together with a therapist from Israel, from Sderot. And we did trauma care for children, and the Japanese children, like children around the world, were able to release their stress for the first time. And that made me realize that, yes, IsraAID is known to be this group of Meshigane Israelis jumping on planes, but actually the real work is not just immediate relief. The real work is long-term. So I actually like to say that IsraAID is first in, but more importantly, we're last out. And in Japan, I ended up staying 3 years, learned Japanese. I met my wife, who is what we call a Jupanese. So, we call it disaster dating. Some dates turn into disaster, some disaster turn into a date. For me, it was the latter. And now we have 2 beautiful Japanese twins who are 5 years old in Israel, and they speak Hebrew, Japanese, and English. So, so when I gave my TED Talk that you were referring to, the title of the TED Talk was Disasters as Opportunities. So the last part of the TED Talk was how I met my wife on the tsunami, or in the tsunami area. But going back to my journey, after 3 years in Japan, I moved to Sierra Leone during the Ebola outbreak. And I have to tell you, that was terrifying. I arrived to Sierra Leone in West Africa when the survival rate was 50%. Every night for the first month, I used to wake up full of sweat, which is one of the symptoms of Ebola. And I was 100% sure that I have the virus. I checked myself and I said, well, not yet. But I survived to tell you that. But after a year in Sierra Leone, I went to Nepal after they had the earthquake. And in Nepal, with a search and rescue team from Israel, we were able to find, we're getting closer to Hanukkah, so I call it our Hanukkah miracle, although it was in April, because we were able to find the last survivor of the earthquake, who is a woman who was trapped under the rubble for 6 days without food or water. We pulled out 21 dead bodies, and the 22nd person was alive. After Nepal, I went to lead a mission in Greece. And you may think, what disaster was in Greece? The disaster wasn't in Greece, the disaster was in Syria. And if you're following the news, the situation in Syria is still very much unstable. At that time, hundreds of thousands of Syrians were going on these tiny rubber boats, and they made it to Greece. And the first people that provided them medical care in Greece were our team from Israel. So, the organization is called IsraAID, so it's pretty clear where we're from. We always joke they probably think they took the wrong boat. But I remember one day in December, exactly 9 years ago, a boat capsized just before it reached the shore, and we were able to pull everyone out. And I was, I'm not a doctor, but I was leading a team of doctors, and I was carrying this cute Syrian girl. Half of her body was in the water. She was, suffering from severe hypothermia, so I handed her over to our doctor. He stabilized her, and she survived. Her father looked at me. He was able to pull himself out, so he was okay physically, but he was in a shock. And after about 10 minutes, he was finally able to open his mouth, and he says something that I always quote, because it was quite remarkable. He said, "My worst enemy became my biggest supporter. And the people who are supposed to protect me back home in Syria are chasing me away." And I think it was the first time that I realized what an opportunity we have through this terrible tragedy that's still ongoing in Syria, not only to save lives, which is our core business, but also to build bridges and change people's perspectives. By the way, this guy came back to me after almost 9 years and wrote me on Facebook just a few weeks ago, thanking me now not for saving his life, but for killing Nasrallah. So I said, thank you. I wasn't in charge of that one, but so you never know. You really never know. After the work in Syria, I went to the worst disaster areas of all, which was opening our office in Palo Alto, California. No, it was okay. I survived. And then I went back to Israel finally, after about 10 years of chasing disasters around the world, to lead IsraAID. And IsraAID, that started as a tiny volunteer organization, is now the largest humanitarian organization out of Israel. We have 450 people in 14 countries around the world, full-time staff. And then we also have a big network of volunteers. And as I said, we're first in and last out. We have a big operation in Ukraine. We have a big operation in many countries in Africa. And in the summer of 2021, following the fall of Kabul, I did probably the most stressful operation. I found myself on the border of Afghanistan with a group of Israeli activists, and we were able to pull out 205 girls from the hands of the Taliban. It was the first Afghan girls robotics team. It's really an operation that would put Fauda to shame. At the peak of it, we found out that 41 of these girls didn't have a passport. So we had to find a way to print passport for these Afghan girls. We were able to contact a guy who used to be the Afghan ambassador in Washington. He was no longer the ambassador, but he had passports. So he printed his passport, sent it to us, we got it across the border, and with the help of some very generous people, we used free private jets to pull these people out. Now, we needed a country to take them. We knew that eventually they will arrive to the US or Canada, but in the meantime, we needed a country, so who did we contact? Our new best buddies, the UAE. It was just after the Abraham Accords, and we contacted the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and when he heard there was an Israeli group pulling Afghan girls, he immediately said, bring them over. We didn't want to publish it, but it was on CNN, and the Emiratis call it the first humanitarian operation of the Abraham Accord. By the way, on October 7th, in our darkest time, the most heartwarming message I received was from this Afghan ambassador, telling me he knows the atrocities that extremism could cause, and he feels the pain of the Jewish people. So we worked in 64 countries, but never in Israel. In fact, when Israel was established, our goal was to work anywhere but Israel. We would like to see ourselves as the humanitarian wing of the startup nation. Not because there wasn't a need in Israel, but we thought there's great organization doing great work at home. We don't want to compete with them. But of course, everything changed on October 7th. And it took us a bit longer because it was so personal. Thank God my family was okay, our team was okay, but I lost my mentor, who was murdered on that day. First, we thought she was kidnapped, and then we found out she was murdered. She was actually a peace activist named Vivian Silver, of blessed memory. So it was very, very personal. But on the morning of October 8th, we launched our largest operation to date in Israel to provide relief for the hundreds of thousands of people who lost their homes and lost their families. And unfortunately, I learned that all of the experience that we had in Afghanistan and Syria and Nepal and all of these places was very much needed at home. And we operated 16 evacuation shelters. In fact, the first thing we did was to operate what we call child-safe spaces. In Hebrew, we call it makom batuach, safe space. And to me, the first time that it hit me, the levels of trauma that these people experienced was when a mother from Kibbutz Be'eri, she heard us saying, this is makom batuach, this is a safe space. She said, how can you call it a safe space? There is no safe space, there is no makom batuach. So we told her, you're right. We're not going to call it a safe space. We're just going to call it a space, makom. So we worked with the survivors of the kibbutzim. We helped them get back on their feet and go back to their homes. Most of them did, but still, Kibbutz Be'eri, Kibbutz Kfar Aza, Kibbutz Nir Oz are out of their homes, and it will take years to rebuild. We worked with the Nova survivors. We took 1,200 Nova survivors to healing retreats. And we also worked with the Bedouin community, and you may think, what happened to the Bedouins? But actually, the people who suffered the worst heat by Hamas rockets and by the Iranian attack, the only person who was injured was a Muslim Bedouin girl who didn't have a bomb shelter. So IsraAID, found ourselves building 62 bomb shelters for Bedouin communities in southern Israel, something that we never thought we will end up doing. And after the terrible attack of the Druze village in the Golan, in Majd al-Shams, we also started trauma care for children there. So that's our work in Israel, and it's a huge operation, and it's still ongoing. And unfortunately, as I described to you, the needs are there, especially in northern Israel. The recovery will take years. In Gaza, on the other side of the border, we didn't think we can do much as a humanitarian organization. There is a humanitarian crisis. I think we all agree who is responsible for this crisis, but there are people who need help there too. But we didn't think we can help them. We thought we are Israelis. But then I met one of the bravest, if not the bravest person I know, and she's actually here tonight. You didn't introduce her because you didn't know, so this is probably a pleasant surprise for you too, but I do want to introduce you to Sarah. Sarah, can you just stand up for a second? Sarah is first and foremost a friend from Ramallah, and has been working on building peace in the region for many years. And after October 7th, we launched something that unfortunately I can't share too much of, but it's a new coalition called MENA-AID. And it's a partnership between Israelis, Palestinian, Jordanian, and refugees from Syria who are based here in the US. We are working very closely with the IDF and with trusted partners to deliver aid and to make sure the aid doesn't reach Hamas. We have a way to do it. We have a network of trusted partners, and the fact that we are Israelis and we're able to coordinate it very closely with the IDF really ensure the aid reaches where it needs to. So it's a huge effort, and it will take years to rebuild southern Israel, northern Israel, and Gaza, but the only way to work on this is working on this together. And I was worried when we started this operation in Gaza because we work with these kibbutzim who went through the worst massacre. So I went and told them this, and one of the leaders of this kibbutzim from Kibbutz Re'im, just outside the Nova Music Festival, when I told her we are working on this initiative, she told me this is the most hopeful thing she heard since October 7th. So thank you very much for being a wonderful friends and supporters for many years. This community has been a long-term supporter of IsraAID. Unfortunately, and it's really unfortunate, we are not running out of business. So thank you in advance for continuing to support us. Toda rabah.